So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. The premise of where we are at in the last episode and this one is that hope, even the most radical kind, where a vision for the future transcends one's understanding of it, can nonetheless lend itself to very practical decisions, and that those decisions can be instrumental in bringing about what one hopes for. We're still in the story of plenty coups in the Crow Nation, who made certain proactive decisions, paid a certain price for them, but without those actions, the final vision of a survived and revived good would not have been realized. Theologian Richard Foster calls it the cooperation of grace and effort. My name is Lowell Bliss. Welcome to episode 42 of the Liberator Today's video series on hope. Richard Foster, author of Celebration of the Disciplines, is retiring from public ministry. The interview that Christianity Today published with him is entitled, "Effort is not the opposite of grace." All that happens is by grace, Foster says. Grace is God's interactive relationship with his children. There are times when God just pours grace into a person's life. But the normal ways that grace functions are through this interactive relationship. There's a back and forth. There is a role that we play in our relational life with God. That role is, as Paul puts it, that we are to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, unquote. Now, Foster is talking about how the fruit of spiritual formation is achieved. Effort is applied through exercising the spiritual disciplines, which cooperates with the inner workings of grace. It's similar to what Paul says of the local congregation at Corinth. "I planted the seeds in your hearts, and Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow." Last week we talked, tongue-in-cheek, how according to Psalm 77, Yahweh, Moses, and Aaron formed a team in shepherding God's people across the Red Sea. We said that Abat.Dia, Plenty Coups, and Yellow Bear were such a team for the Crow. Here we have Paul and Apollos applying effort and God offering the grace. We are mistaken if we believe that hope is simply waiting on our butts for the beatific vision to be realized. But we are equally mistaken if we think that we alone are responsible to construct our hoped-for future. We can think of it from the standpoint of setting sails on a boat in order to catch the wind, in order to carry us to a specific destination. Amy Carmichael wrote, "We have not to make the wind or to beseech it to blow. We have nothing to do with the wonder of it. Our one work is to set our sails and to catch the least whisper of it. Blow, O blow breath," really only means, "O breath, my sails are set, according to the promise of my Lord. Fill them now." And Amy Joseph, from whom I found the Amy Carmichael quotation, comments, quote, "Every day we must set our boats on the water and send up our sails. Some day this work will seem effortless. Other days, though, just getting the boat from the dry dock to the water will require mammoth amounts of sweat. Hoisting up sails in a blistering wind or trying to stay afloat in a choppy sea will require resolve." Unquote. Last week we saw that the Crow translated the interpretation of Plenty Coups' dream into the practical action of allying themselves with the white men against their own traditional enemies, the Sioux and other neighboring tribes. And that Plenty Coups very much ascribes to that decision the success of being able to keep their own sacred and beautiful lands. There's obviously latitude to look askance at any of these decisions. Even today, the Crow Nation, who has plentiful coal reserves on their Montana reservation, has not been as quick as the Lakota Sioux and other indigenous peoples to protest oil pipelines like Keystone XL or the Dakota Access. A second set of practical actions that the Crow people made had to do with education. According to Yellow Bear's interpretation, the Chickadee person, quote, still held his home, his country, because he had gained wisdom by listening to the mistakes of others, and knew there was safety for himself and his family. The chickadee is the medicine of Plenty Coups from this day. Unquote. As a chief, Plenty Coups encouraged young men and women from the Crow tribe to be educated in white schools. He once told his people, quote, "With what the white man knows, he can oppress us. If we learn what he knows, he can never oppress us again." Apparently, a more sanitized version of that quotation reads like this: "Education is your most powerful weapon. With education, you are the white man's equal. Without education, you are his victim." Unquote. Robert Yellowtail is an example. When Yellowtail was 13 years old, he left the Crow Reservation and went to the Sherman Institute in Riverside, California. He attended the Extension Law School in Los Angeles and eventually got his law degree from the Correspondence Law course of the University of Chicago. Plenty Coups, like a chief of old rallying the young warriors of old, recruited Yellowtail to defend the reservation against a bill sponsored by a Montana senator that would open up Crow lands to homesteading. Jonathan Lear calls this, quote, "the wisdom of the chickadee unto the second generation." In the end, let me simply commend Jonathan Lear's book to you, Radical Hope. Lear really does try to catalog as many ways as possible, ways that the Crow made practical decisions that resulted in beneficial gains. They applied effort to grace, and their efforts were informed by Plenty Coups' dream. Lear doesn't try to patronizingly claim that the Crow have thrived, but he does believe that they have survived when they wouldn't have, and in many cases revived. Some of the stories of reviving the old sense of the good life are quite poignant, including when Plenty Coups was chosen to represent the Native Americans who fought in World War I. The dedication of the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery, the old chief planted a coup stick. But here's one of my favorite stories. I'll let Jonathan Lear tell it. Quote, "At Plenty Coups' home, that tree, which appeared in his dream and under which Slenderman's interview was conducted, that tree is still standing, and his house is now a state park. Plenty Coups got the idea of donating his house when he visited Mount Vernon, George Washington's house. Here's an instance of taking up a white man's idea in order to establish an institution that would preserve and transmit traditional Crow values. Plenty Coups and his wife, strikes the iron, wanted to will his house and property to the U.S. government to be, quote, set apart as a park and recreation ground for the members of the Crow tribe of Indians and white people jointly, in trust and perpetuity. In one of history's ironies, the U.S. government took itself to be unable to accept the land as a gift. It seems that the government could only take land, not accept it." Unquote. It's all been worked out now, and you can visit Chief Plenty Coups State Park just 40 minutes south of Billings, Montana. Lear writes, quote, "How the Crow should go forward, it is not my business to say. I am only pointing out the radical form of hopefulness embedded in Plenty Coups' vision, that even with the death of the traditional forms of Crow subjectivity, the Crow can nevertheless survive and flourish again. Plenty Coups was able to lead himself and his people forward into an unimaginable future, committed to the idea something good would emerge." Unquote. Next week, we'll conclude our study of Plenty Coups' story and hear Jonathan Lear make explicit the 6 points of radical hope that served as a pathway for the Crow and can serve as a pathway for us as well. I'm Lowell Bliss, Christian environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.